I don't say, oh, Mike, you might not like what I'm about to say, because that's not really helpful. Just say the thing, right? So it's building that to be able to develop that relationship where you have that authenticity. So then if I make a mistake or you make a mistake, we're more forgiving of that because we're human beings. We're not perfect. We will make mistakes, and there has to be room for error.
Welcome to the Unconventional Leadership Podcast, where we help you unlock your potential as a leader. Well, thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Unconventional Leadership Podcast. We are here today in the Cincinnati Podcast Studio with our esteemed guest, Dr. Leighann Rechtin. Leighann, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Mike.
So Leighann and I have known each other for a couple decades.
Yes.
And have been great friends and great idealists around things that we're trying to do to influence leadership and the role that you've played for 15 years at Ivy Tech. I like to say that Leighann trains and develops trainers and educators to be better trainers and educators with the future of our world, right? Because that's what education is,
right?
For those who are seeking next level and leveling up themselves. So it's a real honor to be in the studio with you today.
Thank you. Yeah. Meta education.
Yes.
Yes.
So one of the things, Leighann, that we love to kind of dialogue about is what's going on real time of the conversations and stories and discussions and questions that our listeners are having, that our guests are having, that our members are having, that the community's having, that we're being called into because of expertise. So I'd love to hear your perspective on key topics that you think is driving the world of learning and development, and kind of start there.
Great. And I think some of them have been covered on previous episodes because I've been listening to all of the episodes. And one thing that I think is just extremely prevalent right now is change. That's going to be something that is it's ongoing, right? Change is similar to conflict. We're always going to have it. So we have to anticipate that it's going to happen. But I think right now there's a lot of anticipation about change in the world, and just figuring out where's our influence, right? Where's our circle of influence for change, and where is it that we can adapt and be agile, and how can we help those, especially as leaders, that we are serving in terms of change? How can we help lead them through it, especially where we might feel dissonance? And that's one big thing. I mean, I think there are many others that kind of are centered around that same topic. So change is definitely one. And I think that leads to then, that's maybe the cause. And then the symptoms are things like stress management, burnout, right? Because stress management that's not been addressed leads to burnout. So then how are we handling that, which is a different conversation? And just being able to be resilient. I think there's something about resiliency that's in that same conversation.
I remember a discussion I was having with a leader at a very large publicly traded company. And this was probably 14 years ago, and he was describing his experience with change management. And it was all around a ERP rollout. This is it's a Fortune 500 business, a national presence. And his comment was, it takes every organization about 3 to 4 times to get a major implementation right. And I was like, well, tell me more about that. And he said, because here's what we do. We all think it's all about technology, software, and implementation. And it's all about the doing of something new from a systems perspective. And then, and his comment was, and then millions of dollars later, you recognize we've done nothing to actually help the humans involved that need to actually roll out the experience of change into the entire enterprise. We've not involved them at all. It was all about the system and software and what you should learn and this new manual and this new thing that's going to turn on this day. And then they turn it on and it fails.
Right.
And they wonder why.
Yeah.
And he mentioned, Mike, it's almost an imperative that any large company has to go through something 3 times to get it right. Why can't we learn to start with the human behavior first, and then we may be successful on the first cut? You may not have to fumble 2 and 3 and 4 times. And I think that's a great experience of what we're learning together.
Yes.
Is that we're bringing the human element
Mm-hmm.
to the change discussion
Mm-hmm.
because it's so much about the humans in the room that you need to bring along because they're the ones who are actually going to help it be successful.
Exactly. And if they're not bought in to the change, right? It has to start with the why. And you have to bring people in and get them on board because I'm smiling as you're explaining that ERP experience because we probably, if you've worked at an organization long enough, you've experienced
Everyone's
something like
lived it
that,
out.
right? And you're going, wait a second, we did all these meetings, we had all this prep, and then we still aren't ready because
Right.
you're never really going to be ready
Yeah.
for that change. You have to sometimes get the people on board, like you're talking about, to expect that there is going to be some dissonance, there's going to be some discomfort. And then how can we, again, it kind of goes back to that resiliency. How can we overcome that and learn from it, recognizing that? And I know you've talked on the podcast before about psychological safety. And that's a huge element that has to be present for change to be successful. If people don't feel safe to fail, then how are they going to be able to be comfortable with that? They're not going to be comfortable with that.
How does one do that? Or where do we start? What are some tenets or something that we can share to get people to go, you know what? I should invest a little bit more time there and learn more about that topic. So if psychological safety is a key pillar to change management,
Right.
what does that even mean?
Yeah, it's a good question. So psychological safety is a big piece of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is understanding really how to interact with other humans. And so there's a huge component of trust. I know in a previous podcast, you talked about trust and the importance of building relationships. And that's only going to happen by somebody maybe making a mistake, right? So, you and I have been friends for a couple decades.
Right.
And throughout that time, there might have been moments where I know we've had moments where I'm like, well, Mike, hang on, let me explain to you how I'm seeing this. And in those moments, that's where we're developing trust, where I can say, this might not be a common opinion and I don't give disclaimers beforehand, right? I don't say, oh, Mike, you might not like what I'm about to say because that's not really helpful. Just say the thing, right? So it's building that to be able to develop that relationship where you have that authenticity. So then if I make a mistake or you make a mistake, we're more forgiving of that because we're human beings. We're not perfect. We will make mistakes and there has to be room for error.
Yeah, I'm thinking through situations that you and I have worked through together.
Yeah.
And it's like we both, when you know that those you're on a team with or those that you interact with, their heart's in the right place. We all, the environment is we all care about one another.
Exactly.
We can be more open and vulnerable with no filter because the transparency is desired.
Yep.
Right. Yep. And we've had discussions around that where it's like, oh, this happened. And this was the outcome. And what can we learn from it? How can we move on? Not how do we harp on it and sit in it, but those conversations take time. We've talked, yes. I know there was a recent guest who was talking about my natural instinct is to start with trust until it's taken away. And then it has to be rebuilt and it takes time to build into those relationships. But there's a reason why that is a good model of leadership because starting with trust versus assuming you can trust no one.
Right.
And I do share with those joining us today that there are times where you've been in work environments where you learn you can't trust anyone. And so I do understand that. We have a heart for that. Our goal is to help you learn in a manner that you can lead from a lens of building trust in your environment and reestablishing trust. Because there are times where, I've had team members say, I wish you just would have told me that.
Sure.
And that erodes a little bit of trust because you didn't tell them that.
Yeah.
Right. And rebuilding towards that, but leading with a lens of integrity. One of our faculty members uses the word integrous a lot. Like, how do I become fully integrous, which is in her perspective, fully trustworthy.
Yeah.
And what does integrous mean? Means complete vulnerability and transparency and willing to share it all. But in order to get there, that's that culture thing. I've got to build a culture that is fully integrous, where people can share things, disagree with things, even argue and tension, because it's needed,
Yeah.
not because I'm trying to win, because we need to debate about this conversation and figure things out. So, if we're establishing that psychological safety of vulnerability, transparency to navigate change, are there other kind of like key pillars and tenets that you think are important to build upon or add to the foundation?
Oh, absolutely. Of change management. Oh, yes. There are many pieces that go into change management. I think there has to be strategy, right? You can't clearly just go into it like, let's see how this goes and just we're going to wing it.
Right.
There has to be some strategy, but that strategy has to be flexible. You have to be able to have, your plan A, B, C, and to Z. And if you don't have that, then I think obviously you're going to erode trust by just not having a clear plan. So I think that's a huge component of it. You were talking before too about culture, and that's a really big piece. People have to be bought into the overall culture, I think, before you really enact some major changes. I mean, I think that's the other piece of change management is that there are things that change every day, and then there are the big changes. So what exactly are we talking about when we think about change management is one piece, but if it's a cultural shift, right? So we want to get this organization that has, let's just say, the way that they do performance management, right? We'll just take one component of that. Let's just talk about performance evaluations because a lot of organizations could probably improve in that area. And so, okay, we have annual performance evaluations and we require that they be done. Well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Let's say we wanted to enact a change with that process and we want to say, all right, we're going to we really want it to be, we'll document the performance evaluation, but we really want to make sure that you're having a conversation and there's a flow to that process. So meaning the employee evaluates themselves first, then let's say it goes to the manager, then they have a conversation about it, and then maybe that's all documented. Well, let's just say you've never done that before. You've got to have a conversation about what that looks like. You've got to role model that as well. We can't just expect people to understand what that process is going to be like if we're not willing to demonstrate it. And so there's steps in change management, right? Like, for example, with that one example right there with performance management, with the cycle, then we need to maybe step that out a little bit. Let's not change the whole thing. Let's change pieces of it along the way. And I do want to bring up too, you were talking before about really what makes me think about toxicity in the workplace and a toxic environment, right? We hear people throw that out. It's a toxic environment. Sure. And what's toxic to me might not be toxic to someone else. And so another piece I think that comes up with change management is understanding agility and how to be agile and how we show up in the workplace for other people. And that maybe I have a supervisor that someone else did not work well with. And they're like, oh, be careful, right? But watch out. That person that's a toxic individual. And then I come into the role and I'm like, this isn't toxic, because you have to understand how to adjust and adapt. We talk a lot about situational leadership, which feels like it goes on the leader, right? So, okay, I've got to adapt and adjust based on who I'm leading. But what about the followers? Like, where's the accountability on everyone to be able to adjust based on who's leading them? Because we're not going to show up the same. I mean, you have 3 kids. I have 3 kids. We're not the same. You're not the same dad with your 3 kids, just like I'm not the same mom to each of them. But my kids have to also respond differently based on how I'm leading them.
Yeah, but there's things that you and I might say that one would respond completely different to.
Exactly.
Because of how they're wired, how they think, and their experiences.
Yes.
And then amplify that times a functional team of 13 or a leadership group of 18 with 136 reports that cascade down from them, or thousands. I mean, I was with an HR leader just a few weeks ago that referenced they have 7,000 employees, associates in North America. That's a lot of learned and lived life experiences that are definitely not all the same.
Yes.
Right. And there's the phrase around change management and emotional intelligence is like leadership is really a one-to-one sport.
Yeah.
And I have disagreed with workforce policy that like try to make everyone in the same box. And we talk a lot about, if we really think about the phrase, bring your whole self, like I got to learn a lot of people, and that's leadership. Like leadership, I think, is one in those one-to-one interactions, those building trust with, being fully trustworthy, but also displaying that to different people on the team, because we've all have different experiences. So what you just said, what one thing may trigger one person may not trigger the other.
Yep.
And learning what triggers is a key part of maximizing and unlocking full potential, right?
Exactly.
I know it from my own 3 children.
Yes.
They're all 3 so different. What motivates one of them will completely demotivate the other. And, maybe even vice versa. What one says to me is like, I'm feeling pretty crummy after that comment versus, what another one says, I take it in a different way. It's so fascinating.
Yes.
And I think we can bring that into our workplaces and our team environments, sporting the best athletic coaches, the best. There's a lot that aren't the best, but those that are the best really sink into this.
Oh, yeah.
And they also know how to bring and galvanize a whole team. They know how to motivate the one that's not getting as much playing time while lifting up those that are, and vice versa, to really be ready to rock and roll when that team's ready to go out onto a field or a court or an environment. So
we've got a lot of metaphors going here.
We have a lot of metaphors.
Yeah, I like it though. And I'm gonna throw one more in, because as you were sharing before, I was thinking about how it's like a cultivation, right? So change management is a lot like growing or taking care of a plant. And you've got to make sure that the person really is kind of like in the soil. They're in the right soil. And that helps with some of that toxicity that we were talking about before. Are they in the right role, at the right place, right? Doing the right thing where they are able to show up as their authentic self. And maybe they did that for 5 years and it was great, but it might be time to switch soil. And we need to, or repot them, right? So I'm thinking about this idea as you're talking about it is like nurturing and growing, and how are we, like, we can't just plant the seed and go, well, good luck, right? We've got to cultivate that. And so we've got to water and, give them sunlight and all the other things in terms of plant, but we do the same thing with people. And that's going to look different based on each person. So it's understanding what motivates them. How do they like to be recognized? How do they like to be rewarded? And as you said, and it takes a lot of energy, and people managing is a job, right? That is a career by itself, people managing.
Our mission of connecting businesses with the talent and resources necessary to help you achieve your vision and unlocking human potential are what Centennial and Talent Magnet Institute have been all about now for a collective 55 years. Centennial celebrates our 50th year, TMI is going into our 5th year, and we are ready to help you and your team get to the next level of strategy, vision, and achievement. Feel free to reach out and send us a note, and let's have a conversation. Yeah, there's a component where leaders get frustrated at times. And I've had them share with me, like, I'm frustrated because I know this person was a high performer in her or his last work environment because it came out in the interview. And then I hired them and they're not giving what was produced on their resume. And the feedback, I remember specifically a very successful CEO in the Cincinnati, Ohio area telling me that when I interview, I don't just ask about them. This brings your potted plant analogy.
Oh, I can't wait.
I want to know, what was it about your last environment that helped you be so successful? And I'll, again, going to like a sales individual. A salesperson could be high performing in their current environment, get into a new environment and fall flat.
Sure.
And they're still a great salesperson. But what was the system? What was that soil that was around them helping give nutrients to the plant to grow? And what was the cadence? Like, what was the watering strategy and all these things that took to get this individual to be at the top of her or his game. And sometimes we forget about that. We think, oh, it's just the person.
Yep.
And it's not. So for us as leaders, as we're managing and helping others and ourselves unlock our potential, we need to be thinking about the whole picture. What is it about this team chemistry that makes us thrive? Or what is it about this team chemistry right now that we're not doing so well, right? What is it about the environment, the tools, the resources that surrounded you that made you so successful? And I think we also have to define that for ourselves.
Oh yeah.
Like when are we at our best? What is it about our colleagues, our mindsets, our attitudes, what's going on in life that helps us be at our best? What are our daily habits? What are our weekly cadences? When are we at our best? What does that look like? And who needs to be around me? So that when you go into another environment, you're like, oh, the grass isn't greener. Well, it's not, because the thing that made the grass green was the team you were with, right?
Exactly. Yes.
That allowed you to thrive.
Yeah. Or the fertilizer, right? Whatever it is, whatever it is that makes up that environment. And there are multiple factors to that. And it could be something happening in that person's personal life as well.
Absolutely.
So, but you're exactly right. It's the system. It's the whole system.
Few other topics. What other topics are we hearing? Are you hearing that you're spending quite a bit of your time investing in and sharing with teams and working with, educators? What are some of the key topics you're hearing at conferences that you think is relevant today for those that are joining us?
Sure. I mean, there's a huge topic that I am personally not qualified to talk about, which is AI, artificial intelligence. I mean, that is massive. And I say I'm not like I know enough to be dangerous, but that's definitely a topic. That's something that is going to impact, right, the way we move forward. I think similar to when we were first, I don't necessarily remember this, but when we were first getting online, right? And first emailing people and all of the things that have changed. So with technology, so that's definitely one. And then I think as well, this is a big topic with multiple layers, and that's what we're really talking about: managing people managers, and that people are really good at doing their job, but they might not be as effective at leading others. And so we see this so often. They get promoted because they were so great at doing whatever it is. We'll use our soil metaphor, planting seeds. And then they get promoted, and now they're meant to be taking care of these plants, and they don't know how to do that because no one has taught them. And the way that people learn how to manage other people at first is based on what they knew, what they experienced, what worked well, what didn't work well. And so they're going to try to emulate what worked for them, and they're going to try to not do what didn't. And there are a lot of pieces that go into that, like crucial conversations. How do we have those tough conversations with others about something that's going on, right? As somebody that reports to them, it might be awkward to bring up. One of the biggest things that are awkward to bring up is our hygiene related things that have to be addressed, but it's very awkward. So that's one topic. Another is, again, that performance management cycle and what that looks like. How do we encourage development in other people when we don't know, we know how we like to be developed, but we might not necessarily know how somebody else does. So how do we do that? How do we help them stay organized? And how do we help them stay motivated? And how do we help them engage? There's another topic. Again, like I said, these are subtopics that you could just pull out and do a whole series on.
Right.
Employee engagement.
Yeah.
Right. How do we help them show up with energy every single day? So yeah, there are a lot of, I think, those subtopics, and then going back to just workplace wellness as well.
So some of the exciting things that we have the privilege of both brainstorming on, building, thinking about, dreaming about is how do we help others learn how to lead more effectively in a proactive way. So we have the privilege of working with teams who are asking us about, here are the things we know we need to be doing to invest And, I was sharing with someone today at lunch about our outsource. We're really serving as like a partner, a learning development partner.
Yeah.
Right. So we look at data, we look at questions, we know our ethos, like what Talent Magnet Institute's all about, what drives us, what motivates us. And it's to help improve human behavior, learn how to lead, communicate more effectively, learn how to ask great questions, disagree, connect, build trust and credibility, and improve cultures. And then we help teams do this, right? So we work with teams, whether it's 6 or 18 or 54, and helping us learn and grow together, build chemistry, build connection. In doing that, we're equipping people more proactively than just learning from experience.
Exactly.
Like learning from your work experience. A lot of us got to a point where it's like, oh, I want to lead like that. I don't want to lead like this. Yeah. And that's how you learn. So we're trying to bring tools and resources real time to get teams talking about this. And I would say we're breaking down walls, improving trust in every discussion we're leading. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah. Yes. I think that it is, and like we talked about before, it's in steps, right? And I know you've said before, it's a journey. It's the process. It's not, so many people think, they confuse training and professional development, right? And they think like, well, I just need this one training session on this. Can you come in and can you do the session on effective communication? Okay, well, that gives me pause because I have a couple degrees in communication and I know what it takes, right? It's not just going to be a 2-hour workshop.
Yeah.
And so we can't just do these one-off things and think, well, that was fun. That was a good chat, right? Yeah. And then we're going to expect people to be different. We have to see the behaviors implemented. And so that's going to take time. And so we need to see that investment over time. And so one of the things that I know a lot of leaders are seeking when they're looking for professional development is, how can I help my employee, maybe that's going to this professional development, come back to the workplace and utilize this? How can I help reinforce? How can I build into them? And that's something that's really important. And those are only happening through conversations that you're going to have, but then giving them the ability to grow. I think so often people, maybe they take classes or they do, again, a session, but professional development is weaving that back in. And so what happens if you don't have the opportunity to practice it, you are not going to be able to get better, right? You could go read about golf a lot. I know you like to golf.
I read a lot about it.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily getting better.
Well, because you can't get better by reading about
right.
it. That's
yeah,
the
you
thing,
gotta
right?
Get on the course.
You got to do it. You got to do it. And even sometimes by doing it, we're certainly not going to be perfect every time, right? We've got to practice and we've got to get better. And maybe I know very little about golf, but the first time I did golf, I think I was trying to hit it like a baseball bat, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh my goodness, it's in the hips. I didn't know that. So I learned that, right? And so then you can correct. And so it's very similar to what we learn and bring back in the workplace. But a lot of times people don't give individuals the opportunity to do that, not only to do it, but go back to the conversation we were having earlier, to fail while they're doing that, right? And if they don't have the opportunity, or there's not an environment where they can fail safely, then that's going to hinder their ability to grow.
Yeah, there's parts there just to continue building out that analogy.
Yeah.
There's reading, watching, listening for knowledge. Mm-hmm. There's training and getting specific coaching based on who you are. I just finished a book called The Mental Game, and it's all about golf.
Okay. Well, I didn't even know that. And look, I'm bringing it up.
And the conversation is that every human is unique, and we all have talk tracks. Mm-hmm. Those talk tracks will completely destroy anything you try to do in life if it's a negative talk track. If you can't take what you just did, and golf's a perfect example of this, and leadership and leading other people is a perfect example of this. So you have a direct experience that you're living out right now with someone that's maybe, let's just say that it's not as positive as you would like it to be.
Okay.
So let's just say that you just swung and stuck one right in the water, and you're like, I can't play from the water. So now I got to drop a ball. And all you're doing is thinking about, oh gosh, I put it in the water. And the whole rest of your game and day and week could be ruined by that one thing that you did that, like, you gotta leave, not just on the court, on the field, or at work. You've got to like move on immediately because it affects your next swing. It affects your next human interaction with maybe that same person that you're like, that was just a bad experience. Recently on one of our episodes, Becky Sheeler was sharing, like, it's okay to say, hey, I approached it this way. I actually was wrong. I think I'm going to come back on the way that I did, the way I approached this situation. I should have approached it differently. I apologize for the way I approached this situation. I should have listened more. I shouldn't have been quick to respond, and just move on is kind of the mental game. The mental game, it's a great book. And it's like, just move on. Like, yes, it happened, but it's in the rear view. The rear view doesn't get you to where you want to go. And everyone is unique. So we can't create clones of a perfect leader and a perfect manager. We all bring those unique experiences to our interactions, which is a beautiful thing about humans. But if you don't have emotional intelligence, that's a skill you need to work on because it changes everything. If you don't feel like you're the best listener, you need to become a better listener. Yeah. If you don't feel like you listen, if you speak 80% of the time and only listen 20, you may want to work towards reversing that, right? Yeah. Because at the end of the day, as you lead people, it's not about your answers. It's about how you influence and guide others to make their own decisions, right? Yes. So like playing this out, all of us make mistakes. Mm-hmm. All of us have learnings we've got to put in. I'm even saying personally, there's mistakes I've made even in the last 5 years of launching Talent Magnet Institute, that like, I had someone recently ask me, like, what would be your do-over? Becky Sheeler asks this as a key interview question. So if you've never been interviewed by Becky and you're about to, take this with you into the interview. We want to hear your do-over. Like, it's okay to say I made mistakes. Yeah. It's also okay to say, you know what? The thing I think about of launching Talent Magnet Institute is, if I changed decisions I've made the last 5 years, we wouldn't be right where we are today.
Exactly.
And there are things that if I were writing a book on launching a startup while running a 50-year strong family business, that I would say, hey, I would recommend you not do this and try to do this, or ask this question, or do this thing differently. But if I wouldn't have made those mistakes, we wouldn't be where we are today, which is like, I see the next 5 now in this 5-year mark of like, gosh, do you imagine what's possible the next 5 based on everything that we've experienced the last 5? Yeah. And I wouldn't necessarily say I would take a do-over, because then I couldn't carry that lesson with me. So in golf, I wouldn't take a mulligan because I have to accept the fact that I'd made that shot.
Yeah.
And I know what was going through. Just recently, I was out of town and I was getting ready to hit a drive, and one of my buddies was like, Sipple, you need to step back and take a breath before you swing that golf club, because I can feel you tensing up. And he was so right. I was like, oh, I'm glad somebody said it, because I could feel, and just, it's okay to have, and it's also important that we build cultures and teams where people are able to say, hey, I see you getting ready to do this.
Yes.
Are you sure that's what you want to do?
Well,
and not get offended by it.
Exactly. And you're hitting on a couple of other topics as you talk about that we talk a lot about. With one is just self-awareness. Mm-hmm. I mean, there has to be a level of self-awareness.
100%.
And if somebody isn't self-aware, if they're not sure if they're self-aware, then they're probably not. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you're kind of going, I don't know how self-aware I am, probably could work on that. Then there's this element of feedback. And feedback is very interesting to research, because so much of it is about giving constructive criticism, right? It's about giving negative feedback. But I wonder if we got into if we could shift the culture and giving more positive feedback, how different that would be, right? And there's a psychologist, John Gottman, whose research shows that for every one for every one negative we get in life, we need 5 positives minimum to combat that. And so just think about the power of that, right? So if we just started thinking about that more intentionally, how can we give more specific positive feedback? Not great job. That's not very helpful. Specific. What was great about that? And then we can shift that narrative. And then I've seen some research on calling it feed forward instead of feedback, because feedback is exactly what you're just talking about before. It's not helpful. It's, well, what am I going to do with that? Thank you for the information that I don't have a time machine to go utilize, but it will help you moving forward. But that concept of feeding it forward to help the next version of you.
That's good.
And I think this all goes back to resiliency. What you were talking about with the book that you just completed, that's about being resilient, right? That's about learning from those mistakes and then being able to overcome them, because you have the framework to be able to recognize that you will be resilient down the road.
A phrase we use on our platform that we get quite a bit of feed forward or feedback from.
Right. It's a whole thing.
Is
to
positive
learn.
affirmation. Like, micro affirmations is another phrase that we use. Like getting in a habit to say thank you, to find people doing great things. And I know we all talk about it.
Sure.
But it's still so easy to identify a problem or a negative difference. I even look at 360s. Like the first thing we do at 360s is we look at what we scored low on versus like, you know what, I'm going to celebrate the things I'm really positive on. And there are some things in negative that we do need to tweak, especially if it's emotional intelligence and it's how we treat others and all of those things. But there's also certain things that may come up that like, yeah, I'm not good at that. And that should also help inform who you have on your team. I remember LeaderCast is an organization that I've really enjoyed over the years. And Peyton Manning was one of the interviewees. And he shared, they were talking about weaknesses. And this flew in the face a little bit around the whole Strengths Finder topic, the whole, managing to your strengths only. There is a belief that has been shared over the last 15 years that like we need to sit in our strengths and not do anything else that's outside of our strengths. And in fact, I've even heard some people who have said like, if you can just live in your strength and then find other people who offset your weaknesses as their strengths. And I've always a little bit disagreed with that because I'm like, there are some of your weaknesses that you need to strengthen up, because if you don't, you'll never be able to build the best team, the best environment. And Peyton Manning's feedback is he kind of flew in the face of this strengths-based only approach. And he said, you realize that people are not watching tape on Peyton Manning and watching my strengths. They're specifically trying to identify my weaknesses and all of my team's weaknesses to know that when we're shifting to our weakness is when they attack. So they're designing plays to attack my weaknesses. So if my team never focuses on our weaknesses, that would be tragedy. And this wasn't when he was like, I feel like his whole career, he was in his prime, and he was sharing like, so he didn't believe in this whole strengths only focus. And I really took to that. I'm like, I agree with that.
Sure.
Because there are leaders, we've all worked around them, with them. We may even at times have been one that are like, my arrogance is so high, I'm just going to deploy my strengths. And I could care less how everybody experiences my weaknesses. And I personally have been around that, where it's all about like, here's who I am, and you can accept all of the other problems with it. And nobody wants to be on that team, right? And that team can't win. So that's the emotional intelligence, the self-awareness piece, that like understanding the whole self, our whole selves, and going, you know what, I'm going to work on that this year. Yeah. Sometimes I have a natural tendency to go a little negative quick, right, in my mindset. And I always have to remind myself that, Mike, the negatives that you're playing out in your talk track are all because of positive opportunities. Like some of the things that brings me stress is the overwhelmingness of so much positive that lies ahead. And I want to get there but I don't want to enjoy the journey as much. I just want to get there, and it brings stress and tension and keeps me up at night thinking about how do we get there, not enjoying like it is a journey too. And just, let's take a step back. And that's that reflection piece of like, you know what? There are things I would recommend others not do that I've done, but because I've done them, I know what I know now, and I wouldn't know that unless I did that.
Exactly.
And I think we all can think about our own life experiences, and it's okay to go to the individual that you feel like, yeah, but when you say that, Mike and Leighann, I still think I did this inaccurately and should have taken a different approach. And go to that person or write it down to yourself in your journal of like, I want to shift that. And I forgive myself for doing this. And then I throw it in my backpack and I move on, right? And focus on, was it feed forward?
Feed forward. Yep.
Feed forward. Oh,
yeah.
I love this term.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
Has anyone written a book on it yet?
Probably. But that doesn't mean that we can't.
Well, if feedforward.com is available.
Oh, wow. You're making a bold claim.
Oh, we're going to try to go acquire it.
Okay. Okay. Well, of all the things that we've talked about, I did not see that coming.
That's a good one.
But that's very, there's potential there. Yeah.
The conversations that we've been having with, I think we had discussions with 27 different organizations around their needs around talent development.
Mm-hmm.
You and I were in some listening sessions with, I believe it was about 27 or 29 organizations, where heads of HR, CEOs, we even had a professor in the group with us, learning and development professionals, manufacturing professionals. We had a vice president of engineering who joined us in this, because the question we put out was, are any of you thinking about what's next for your own team development and what that could look like? And we'd love your feedback on it, because we're getting ready to launch something that's pretty phenomenal around team development. What in that work, and if you want to further describe it, please do.
Sure.
What are some of the key takeaways that you heard that you thought were like, wow, I didn't either see that coming, or that's affirming, or it's clear there's a shift going on and we're going to respond to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one, I was pleasantly surprised by the number of people who attended. To your point, how many were able to take the time, and we did it early in the morning, which helped, before people were really into work mode, and we did it virtually. So we were able to meet people where they were, which is kind of some of what they said, right? Meeting employees where they are, and being able to come, like you've mentioned before, come alongside that individual and help them where they're experiencing challenges. One of the things that they talked a lot about was the need for competencies, for some leadership competencies, something to be able to say, almost an assessment, right? To be able to look at it and say, here's where I have some areas of opportunity. I like that you talk about weaknesses. I love thinking about it as areas of opportunity, because I have positivity in my strengths. And so I do think about that. But they mentioned that would be a great way to kind of figure out where some of those are. And then how can we almost benchmark, how can we track that journey? And really, the other thing I think that we discussed that came out of that was the importance of what I mentioned earlier, where we've got to give them the opportunity to practice what they're learning. And we've got to do that in an environment where they can't, it's not just a case study or a hypothetical thing, but a real time learning. Because if you're not going to give that chance, then again, you're not going to experience what it's like to actually try to do it, to maybe learn from some of that dissonance, and because it doesn't go well perhaps, and then try it again. And so that was a big piece that they mentioned, that they would want to be supportive of that journey. They, as leaders, recognize the importance of coming in and checking in on, not from a kind of a big brother type of a way, like, how's it going? But really a genuine authenticity of building that relationship and being able to ask, what are you learning? How can I help? How can I support you? Which I think is something that's really critical, again, because what happens is sometimes we have this tendency to take people out of whatever you talked before about, like that system being so important. And we have this tendency to take somebody out of the system. Did you ever watch that show Intervention? Right? Well, it stopped playing, I think, because of this. Because what happens is we take someone out of the system. We're like, okay, we're gonna send you over here, and we're gonna fix you, and we're gonna make you better, and then we're gonna put you back into the same system, and nothing changed in the system. So then the person doesn't succeed, because why would they? Because we did not fix the system. And so sometimes that's why we need things on a macro scale rather than sometimes micro level. But we can still, of course, come alongside individuals. But like you mentioned before, that team growth and development is really important so that we're shifting the culture and the system overall.
So one of the hardest parts about podcasting is the moment you stop talking. I mean, think about it. The majority of the work that you probably put into creating a podcast is in the editing phase. So what if you didn't have to do the editing phase? Here at the Cincinnati Podcast Studio, we help you just come in and talk. We do all the rest. We have the cameras, we have the microphones, we have the lights, and then we have the editing tools to create the perfect content out of your podcast. Not only do you get the full podcast in video and audio, you also get short form content that you can use across all of your pages in social media. So if you want to learn more, go to cincinnatipodcaststudio.com/tour to learn more and schedule your tour with us today.
Yeah, and part of our work over the last 5 years has been very teams-based. Mm. And we do think, and could argue, it is part of the secret sauce, right? Because we're getting teams who are going to be getting reps together as they take the learnings. Then we're also a believer in not being one-offs. So like we're going to train, equip, tools, create dialogue, dissonance, and make sure that when people walk away, it's like, wow, why didn't I share that ever before? And then before the next session, you're getting additional reps. And then the next session, we're able to kind of revisit, talk about that, go in possibly to another topic, unless we feel like, you know what, we need to rest right here and bring that back again, because this is clearly a team that needs help here. Yeah. So that acute focus and intentionality, we are proving with the data we're collecting with our clients and the humans learners that are in our platform and using our methodology and resources and team and facilitators and coaches, that like the getting of reps is strengthening their ability to lead differently, to show up differently, to create a different environment, to not just wish it were different, but to be part of the movement that's happening inside of organizations. I also share with people, we're not trying to convince anyone that learning and development is important. We want to work with those who already know it's important and are looking for unique ways to add to bring, to complement, to add further, or identify, you know what, we're doing this really well here. Like right here, there's a gap. And we could really invest in that specific either level or quadrant of the work teams or workforce and make a really big impact. And we believe at Talent Magnet Institute that there are lots of resources for executive development. There's a gap in early to mid-career. There's a little bit of a gap in senior career. And I also believe that a lot of great programming already exists. So use it all, right? Like, I don't really view even our competitive landscape as competitors, because we're all trying to help create better teams, better humans, better resources. So use us all.
Yes.
Just know that our methodology is in the long-term behavior change and to really create healthier teams, right? So that feedback of those who showed up, it was a really cool, humbling experience. Like, wow, look at all these people who are really in it. Not just they weren't there to share their knowledge. They were there because they really care about the humans they're around and they're influencing.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, here's some extra things we would love to see come into this program. So around the release of this particular conversation, we're going to be rolling out a program called the Unconventional Leadership Program. And it's going to be a multi-layer leadership development experience with the topics that are relevant to what we're hearing from the organizations and leaders who are inside our community, as well as our leadership ethos of becoming a talent magnet. What creates great hiring managers? What creates greatness in the workplace? What creates healthy work environments, and influencing that into the content. And as I like to say, when we're giving an option, I'm going to say, bring it in-house. We believe we're configurable. Most of our clients say like it was completely customized to us, and we're configuring our platform to make that connection, right? Because we want our teams to be like, well, you really listened. Well, of course. Why would anyone not listen? We're not bringing one topic. We're bringing hundreds of different topics that we can deploy based on what you need as a team. And that's part of the sweet spot that we're hitting on. Like, we're not saying here's the only program and this is the only thing we deliver. We're saying like your actual lived experiences matter. And then we're going to build based on our resources and toolkits and team members and faculty and influencers, the right resources for you to create that movement this year of what's most high priority now. And then next year, we'll figure out what that looks like. But right now, let's create movement and positive movement for your entire team to where they come back to you and go, I mean, I've heard quotes and comments that get made all the time of like, this is the most intentional experience I've ever lived through. And that's awesome that my employer actually brought you all in to do this. And that's the mission moments, as I post often on LinkedIn. Those are the mission moments.
Yeah, and that customization is so important because there are plenty, as you mentioned before, very generic things that could be utilized. And that's fine. But being able to customize it to the participants is very important. That's really critical. So that, I think that's an important piece. And look at you feeding forward from the information that you got. Feeding it forward. Creating that unconventional leadership program.
Love it. The other thing that I applaud you in, every time I've ever been in a session with you, you do such a great job of, back to what you just referenced, listening to those I'm actually speaking to. Like, there are facilitators who are there for you to hear what they have to say. And that's like their only purpose in life. It's what they do. They've got a message. They've written a book. They've done these things, and they want to, like, I want you to walk away with these 5 points that I came up with. And I love the fact that our team, our faculty, like, that's not what this is all about. There is content that experts can bring, and we do. But you do such a great job of like listening to the room and customizing based on what's not just what the organization said they wanted to get out of the experience, but where's the room at? Where are the learners actually at that I'm in front of? Because we want to make sure they get value and are able to answer or get answers or thoughts or ideas around what they're dealing with today.
Yeah.
Is there anything in terms of psychological behavior, you have a PhD in this. So there's something about the science and education of learning of why you deliver in that manner.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think part of it is just being able to be authentic, right? I'm showing up as myself. I'm not there as some piece of an identity that I'm trying to convey. I'm just authentically who I am. It's interesting because I will say I do announcements at my church. And when I first started doing that, I got a little bit of some feed forward that said, hey, maybe don't be so funny. And I was like, okay, but I can't do it then. Because if you're going to have me just read the script, that's just not who I am. It's going to sound boring. I'm going to feel nervous about it. You have to like just let me be me. And it's really, so that was, I don't know, 7 years ago. And it's so much fun because I have a lot of people who will say to me, oh, it's so funny when you do announcements, and it's a different style, right? I'm doing my style, and other people, because it's not just me doing this, have their style, and you just have to be yourself. And if you're looking at somebody and you're like, oh, I want to be like that, I'm going to emulate them, it's going to feel weird if you're doing, like, people are going to notice, right? Like, okay, that doesn't necessarily seem so authentic. I think the other thing is just teaching college students, you cannot be a dud. You cannot be just up there, sage on the stage, lecture. I mean, you can, but you're not going to create relationships. You're not going to connect. The students aren't going to say great things about you. I don't even know if rate my professor is still a thing, but if it is, they're not going to say good things there. So you really have to figure out, how do you create those connections? And so I think just one, from teaching communication. So thank you, because it's a practicing what I preach situation, right? And that I am not just talking at people, but having a conversation, having a dialogue, remembering, oh, this person said this before. So tying that back in and just sort of pulling those threads through. And but that's not going to work for everybody. And that's okay. Somebody else might be really great with people's names and faces, and that's not my skill set. So if I see somebody else in another session a month later and I haven't developed that relationship, I might be like, hey, great to see you again, right? And I genuinely mean that, even if I don't, their name isn't popping up in my head. Yeah. And so it's just, I think it gets back a little bit to what you were talking about before with strengths, and just knowing your strengths and living in them. But then, yeah, also recognizing those pieces of areas for opportunity. And I have heard that the definition, I think it's actually Gallup, that says the definition of a weakness is something that gets in the way of our success. So if there are things getting in the way of your success, then you've got to figure out, how do I overcome those things, right? How do I focus on that? But if it's not, and you're just being really nitpicky because you think you need to be perfect, perfectionistic people really struggle because they want to be great at everything. But what is the point of that? Because then you're just mediocre at a lot of things. And I think that's the strength-based theory, is this idea of excellence where we can, and then improvement in areas where we need to.
I like that definition of weakness, so it's not what I'm just not great at. It's what's actually getting in the way of my long-term success, which we would all want to work on.
Yeah.
Right? Which means there's things that I rank low on that aren't as important because they're not directly getting in the way of my success. I just know those aren't things that I was gifted with.
Sure.
But those weaknesses that are getting in the way, that are detrimental to wherever you dream about going and being and becoming, we need to work on those.
Yeah. I mean, you might not. I think of, what do I know about Mike Sipple? I don't know that you need to be all that tuned into government relations, for example, just in what you're doing for the work you do. And so you could say, well, I really need to learn more about that. But is that essential based on what you're doing, right? Is that getting in the way of success for TMI and then for Centennial? Oh, not really, probably. Maybe in some ways. I know you are actually very plugged into different things, right, in terms of the community. And so you're performing at optimal level then. So that's just one example of many examples that we could talk about, where we might say, okay, let me look at it. Gets back to self-assessment. Let me see, where am I with these things? And so, yeah, that's how I think identifying those pieces of what's getting in the way, perhaps. And then one other thing with that is as you mentioned before, that I want to really plug in with self-awareness is getting some feed forward from other people, getting others that you trust to invest in being very authentic and letting you know if there is an area that you might need to work on.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a level of honesty with yourself in terms of feedback that, like, am I really enjoying the work I'm doing? Do I feel called to be here? What do I think I need to improve upon to improve my situation where I'm at in my role? And also, what do I not enjoy doing? Like, what depletes me of all energy? What do I dread? Do I do, what do I do that I dread doing? And what do I do that actually makes me skip to the shower, right? And get excited for the workday?
Hang on. You skip to the shower?
Occasionally.
Okay. I just needed clarification.
There are
on,
mornings. I'm a morning person.
Okay. All right. Okay. Because I don't know that I've ever in my life skipped to the shower.
Well,
so my apologies for the interruption. I just really needed clarity on that. All right.
But there's personal evaluation, and then there's feedback from others. So if you've never participated in a true, healthy, holistic 360 experience, there's a step in between, which is asking some colleagues and friends some questions. Like, what do you think I could do differently? Do you think I'm a good listener? Do you believe that I have emotional intelligence, or is that an area to improve upon? Do you think I'm self-aware? And be open and honest with the feedback. Ask a select group of humans the questions and try not to take it personal. When we do, and then the next level is like a full-blown leadership 360. And you have experiences where people get those and get deeply offended. If we do our job well, we're prepping you with, you're probably going to hear some things that you don't agree with. You're probably going to hear some things that actually feel very personal. And you're going to hear some things that you're like, I had no idea I came across that way, which then makes you defensive. But you can't go back, right? We got to go forward. So we want to get people to a place around feedback where it's like, you know what? I accept that. I may not fully agree with it. And then we say, well, go ask your 5 closest friends if that's what they think too. Almost everyone goes, oh, that was a fun exercise. That's exactly the way they think. But like, that self-awareness is so critical. So if I had a weakness of self-awareness, there are things I've done that I haven't done perfect, right? There are things I've done that I, would learn from and do different. But being self-aware, I remember those moments, those assessment tools where you're like, oh, that is how I come across, and I'm going to work on that. Or, I didn't realize I was showing up in that manner, which is a positive. But like, that self-awareness component, if we weren't self-aware, it'd make our work really hard, because we're trying to read the room and the energy and the experiences and pick up on the unsaid and the nonverbal cues and the verbal daggers that sometimes get thrown across the table that you're like, oh, we need to revisit that conversation on the fly, and we need to do it now in a way that's not going to make everybody just pack up their bags and go home, right? Yeah. So I think that's really great thought for us to leave with you. And Leighann, is there anything else you'd like to leave with those joining us today?
A loaded question, but is there anything else? I don't think so. I do want to, you know what? I'll piggyback. I just want to add one thing on what you were just saying about feedback, because I do think this is really important. I had one instance where this is hilarious in a way to me about the topic, because somebody said something about how, like, am I receptive to feedback? And I was working with the coach, and they said, I wonder if you're receptive to feedback. Because I'll be very, very direct here. I said, please don't give me feedback that you think that I need just because you're giving me some generic thing. Like, I want this to be personalized. Like we talked about, I want it to be personalized. And so they interpreted that as I don't like feedback that I don't want to listen to. And I thought, well, that's weird. Okay. So I asked a few people, do you think that I'm receptive to feedback? And they were like, well, first of all, you're asking me this question, so probably. But they were like, yes, I've never known you to not be receptive to feedback. So it was, in a way, a little opposite of what you were mentioning, where a lot of times it does validate what somebody else has said. So I think it's good to just check any time where somebody says something, but sometimes when people give feedback and we get really defensive of it, it's because they hit a hot button that we've been defensive of maybe our whole lives. And so that's another piece where we just have to kind of check in and see. But I do also want to just share this. I've had people over my life tell me, they say, I've known you now for a little while, and I just want to share that at first, when I first met you, you intimidated me. And I had to really sit with that because I wasn't sure if it was that a me problem or was that a them thing? What were they telling me, right? Like, do I need to change and modify? Or is that just kind of, for whatever reason, the way that I show up, there was something there? And so I did even ask, and when people have said that, I'm like, well, what was it? Like, I don't know. You're very assertive and you're confident. And as a woman, it's just not something that I'm used to. Well, so I've thought about that a bit, and I can't say that I've made any changes based on the way that I show up, because again, I think authentically, this is who I am. So I just want to mention a couple of things about that, because I think sometimes when we think about feedback, we initially go, okay, well, then I'm going to need to make some changes, and maybe not. But it goes back to what you mentioned before with ethos. You've got to be grounded in your values to know where you are willing to make some changes, and then those aspects that you don't want to sacrifice.
Yeah, I'll leave, since you tapped on the ethos comment, one of our values is that people matter. And the phrase is people matter, right? And we kind of further define that, like the word, all people matter, no matter where we are. It's why we love this work. It's why we've got so many free resources, because all people matter. We want to give access to. It's also how we meet a lot of humans around the world, because we've got thousands of people taking advantage and leveraging our self-care quiz, leveraging our leadership foundations course, leveraging our downloadables. I love seeing every week people are downloading all these, tools and resources that we give away. And we're giving it away because we want to help people be better hiring managers, be better leaders. We don't know how they leverage all of the tools. Like, for example, there's a very, very large toy company that leverages our self-care quiz every fall. 3 years running. We show now hundreds of people from this brand that leverage our self-care quiz. This past year, we started asking, I know this sounds obvious, but we asked the question, how did you hear about us? And we started getting feedback. 2 years later, it was like, oh, why didn't we add that to that survey? Like, oh yeah, we probably should do that. And what we learned is there's a trainer in their organization who really fell in love with the self-care quiz. And it's basic and it's simple. And it's 3 years running that they leverage that quiz with now hundreds of people in this brand and all of their sub-brands and subcategories. And it's an online tool. And when you go and research the team members that are leveraging it, I mean, these people are literally all over the world, probably 15, 16 different countries that all work for this very, very prominent organization. And again, it's a mission moment, right? Because we struck a chord. There's a simplicity in it that's almost so simple, and also a little TMI, too much information that we share in this self-action plan. That's like, wow, it's a lot of information, but we do it to put out the full resource, right? So it's something we've learned, but we do it because people matter. And we're trying to serve with this content. We're trying to serve. We really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah.
We appreciate you joining us each and every episode. I want to thank the Cincinnati Podcast Studio for all that they do and bringing this content to you in this manner. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Please enjoy a couple of other episodes in between now and next week. Check out some of our shorts. Send me a note on LinkedIn. Let me know what you heard, what resonated, what questions you have, what content you would like to have us talk about in the next episode.